Biggest thing I'm concerned about for BYU going into Big 12 play is that at times it feels like the rotation for BYU, both offensively and defensively, can be so vast, so much that it actually hurts the product on field. I expect, and I'm going to obviously ask Kalani Sitake and his coordinators this week, if I get a chance to immediate availability, if they plan to cut down the rotation. A lot of you know in basketball that basketball coaches will use the non-conference slate. So in this example, Kevin Young, with his lineup this year, looks absolutely loaded. And I project a 10-man lineup very easily, a 10-man rotation for BYU. But I think the early run for BYU basketball this fall is going to be for Kevin Young to kind of work out who his best 7 to 8, maybe 9 at the most guys are. And then by the time Big 12 play begins, you settle in on who those guys are and they get the lion's share, if not all of the minutes that are divvied up between them. I think it's a similar circumstance that BYU, I think, is trying to do with this team going into Big 12 play. Now, there's 3 football games versus 13 basketball games to get that rotation set. But I still expect Jay Hill, Aaron Roderick, and Kalani Sitake to cut things down here. Maybe they won't. Maybe they believe that they have strength in numbers. But it is my thought that having watched 3 games multiple times, I've gone back and watched all of them at least twice. And in some circumstances, I would consider it being a third time with how much I rewind and rewatch plays to get a feel for things. Watching what BYU's doing, I feel like the rotation is just a little bit too large. A lot of it on defense. I think mainly the linebacking core, the safeties have really rotated very, very heavily. I think you need to narrow in on your best, in the case of linebackers, probably best 6 guys, and say, hey, no offense to anybody else, but these 6 guys are getting, let's say, 90 to 95% of the reps in practice, and they're going to have that same role in the games. I think the same thing at safety. You pick your top 4, maybe 5 guys. Now, if you include the nickel, that moves to 6 because nickel obviously is a big part of this BYU defense. But you find essentially your best 2 at each position and say, these are the guys, barring injury, we're going to roll with, and you roll with them. I think it's already kind of been established with the defensive line. I think I've seen a fairly tight rotation, at least against Wyoming, that I feel like you've got 8 to 9 guys there on the defensive front that are going to be the guys who take the bulk of the reps. I think cornerback, considering that Maury Bamba is the only guy that hasn't really played to this point, once he returns, I think you've got a nice 4 or 5-man rotation there already. Offensively at wide receiver, they've rotated a lot of guys, and I know that they have a lot of talent at wide receiver, but find the top 6 to 7 guys and settle in on that. And that may ace a guy like Cody Hagan out. Now, the other situation is that Cody Hagan, do you want to burn his red shirt? Do you want to burn a red shirt for a guy who's just home off of a mission and in theory is running 6, 7, 8 on the depth chart right now? That's a question that needs to be answered. I think that's the same thing with the running back position. Now, running back's a little different because considering LJ Martin, Hinkley Rapati, and as we found out that Enoch Nawahine was beat up in post-game comments from Kalani Sitake, 3 of the top 4 running backs on the depth chart for BYU are injured and on the shelf right now. So Pokai Haunga, obviously they probably would have liked to have redshirted him, but what he showed against Wyoming indicates to me that he may be the guy that you burn the red shirt on. You make him, I think, for the time being, one of, if you're not your top running back, until LJ Martin reemerges from injury. I really look at it as he showed a lot of flashes of being the type of running back BYU needs to fill the hole until you have a guy like LJ Martin available once again. So I'm interested to see how BYU approaches this when it comes to Big 12 play, because I say it all the time. The level of difficulty goes up immensely, and it gets no tougher, it feels like in many respects, than the opener this Saturday night against Kansas State. The Wildcats are one of the most physical and just demanding teams. I mean, demanding in the sense that you have to be locked in on these guys, laser focus at all times. And if you're rotating 3 and 4 guys at different positions, there's going to just be slippage simply due to the fact that communication is going to be lacking as guys in and out of the lineup. And that is my chief concern for BYU with the amount of rotation they have had in this non-conference slate. Do I begrudge them for doing it? No, I actually think it was absolutely brilliant the way they have done it, and especially considering they're 3-0 on the season. They're halfway to bowl eligibility. They've handled their business, and things look like they are in a pretty solid place right now. But the hope is that if you do tighten that rotation, essentially you look at the tape, you've got 3 games of evidence for these guys, and you say, okay, these are our best 2 guys at, let's say, free safety. These are our best 2 guys at Sam linebacker. The thought is that those 2 players given the extra reps, obviously the extra game time, understanding more of their role, etc., should yield better play overall for BYU across the board. Am I up in the night and saying this? Maybe I am. And maybe I ask Kalani Sitake and says, no, Jake, you're absolutely wrong. We're actually going to keep the rotation going. But I'm paid to make I'm a second guesser. I'm paid to make my opinions known on this podcast. I think that the rotation should be cut down. It will be cut down. And fingers crossed, it yields better play for BYU, because if they can tighten some things up, we talk about there are still holes for this BYU team in the passing game. Obviously, the running game still needs to show better. I think the offensive line has still got a ways to go before it really is considered, I think, a very good offensive line. And then on the defense, this is a defense that was much maligned a season ago, and the early returns are that they are absolutely dominant. I'll regurgitate a point made by BYU Statsman on Twitter on Saturday night. BYU has held their first three opponents' QB rating or QB efficiency rating in the 70s. From 2001 to 2023, you know how many times BYU got back-to-back games of keeping a QB efficiency rating in the 80s? Literally has never happened. So early returns for BYU defensively are absolutely elite. How much better could they get if they rotate that, close down that rotation a little bit, and maybe get some better cohesiveness as a unit? It's tantalizing. I mean, it's absolutely tantalizing to consider what it could mean for BYU. Is it going to be the cure-all that's going to make BYU suddenly the surprise team of the Big 12 season? No, because guess what? These opposing teams, they're very, very good. And BYU faces all 5 of the preseason ranked teams in the Big 12 this season. It starts off this weekend with number 13, Kansas State. Not too far away, you got Arizona and Oklahoma State. Oh, by the way, there's the University of Utah out there as well. Just, you look at the slate of games BYU's going up against in these next 9 conference games, and it's a really, really tough road. And I would curb some expectation that BYU could, I think, put out like a 9-3 record, because unless they absolutely catch fire right away, I think that's a little bit out of reach. But I'm not saying that BYU can't be a factor in Big 12 play. This is a team that has shown gumption. Going to SMU and winning the way that they did when things absolutely weren't firing on all cylinders. You lost your top 2 running backs in the game. You had a quarterback who had a turnover spell that was absolutely dizzying at times, and you still won that game. That showed grit. It showed tenacity. It showed you guys have fight, unlike what we saw at the tail end of last season. That fight could make BYU an absolutely dangerous team for any Big 12 team playing them, whether BYU's at LaVell Edwards Stadium, as they will be this Saturday night against Kansas State, or if they're out on the road. I'm really looking forward to this upcoming Big 12 season, because I think year 2 in the Big 12 for BYU has got a big target on it. Speaking from the BYU football program's perspective, they want to go out there and say, hey, I know you guys thought we were pushovers a season ago. We ain't that. We're not that team. We're a different team, and we're going to show it. And could come as soon as Saturday night when they take on Kansas State under the lights out there, as Connor likes to call it, the Les. I call it LaVell Edwards Stadium, or LES. But hey, nonetheless, should be a really, really fun time.